Good morning. I'm here this morning. Going to be in the book of Jonah for a minute or two and some other places. I'm listening to the roosters crow and nice weather, and we're sure spoiled. And we've gotten this great winter, all this rain, and now we probably won't see rain. It's hard for people around the country to realize we may not have rain for 6 months, and we might. God can do whatever He wants, but we could easily go May to November and not ever see the rain. But there's sure a lot of water falling and snow in the mountains. If the liberals had enough sense to dam up some places and save water, we could water the whole state and have it like the Garden of Eden. But who wants a state that's flourishing and profiting and having lots of food and exporting and making money for everybody? And it's hard to create anarchy and overthrow a constitution when everybody's doing well. So they got to make us all doing bad, but not to be on politics too much here. But I wanted to read just a quick word. Really, just a word is all I'm looking for. This is not a Baptist book. This is a well-written book on the history of fundamentalism. And fundamentalism is a different kind of a term than most people would realize. This is David Obeel, In Pursuit of Purity. I've mentioned it off and on. A book like this, I don't just sit and read cover to cover. I'll read 4 or 5 pages and put it down and then just stick it in my head. I'll highlight spots, go back and read a few pages because I want truth in my heart that affects me. And it's interesting, I've read some of this, and here William Jennings Bryan, there's a 1923 General Assembly of the New York Presbytery. So the Presbyterian big shots are all meeting together to decide what to do. And of course, we don't believe in an organization of people over churches, but the Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians, all the Protestant churches have that. They got that from the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church got it from the devil. The Bible it's all about independent ministries and independent churches, and nothing wrong with an association where folks, we have a conference here, a camp there, whatever, folks that we fellowship with, but nobody's over anybody else in those things. But I want to just show you, and again, this is an old, this is a quote in 1923 when the General Assembly met in Indianapolis. The liberal-backed president of Ohio's Wooster College was elected as moderator, defeating William Jennings Bryan on the 4th ballot. Wishart described his election as here's the quote, a victory for tolerance. A victory for tolerance. And that's the word, tolerance. Let's be tolerant. No, let's not. Let's just do the right thing. And being tolerant is still a word. Now, you notice how tolerant liberals are of conservatives. You notice how tolerant the trans culture is of the traditional people. They're not tolerant at all. You know how tolerant the liberals were of President Trump when he got elected. There's no tolerance there. They want tolerance the other way. They want us to be tolerant of people who believe that total whoremongering is okay, and that's complete perversion of biblical morals and biblical family values that to totally pervert that we should be tolerant of those things. But this Presbyterian, and they were still struggling with this thing of fundamentalism. I printed an old, and this is way too small, even for me to read hardly, but this is basically history of somewhat of fundamental believers for the past 300 years. And it's got all these lines here and there of who's from where and all. But the thing that was interesting here is they listed the 1910 General Assembly of the Northern Presbyterian, their 5 fundamentals. And I've mentioned the fundamentals right after the turn of the century, 1910, 1920, some very wealthy men paid to have these books called the Fundamentals written and then printed, and they paid for copies of those books to be sent to every preacher, every missionary around the world, because they were trying to protect the fundamental doctrines that we believe in. And this is 130, 120 years ago. And long before that, you look at the book of Galatians, and he said, I wish these people would be accursed that have brought you another doctrine, another gospel. But so heresy is nothing new. But here, this is in particular the Presbyterian Church, as I happen to be reading in this book, The Pursuit of Purity. But let me read you these fundamentals. Let me go back to the books first. Those books, these are all the main doctrines that supposedly a fundamental Christian would believe. Fundamental means going back to the most basic things. A fundamental internal combustion engine doesn't have to be supercharged. It doesn't have to have a certain kind of transmission. It's just the simplest matter of converting gas, putting it into a piston and a cylinder, and the piston is pushed in a cam and crankshaft, and on and on. The most fundamental means the most basic things. And that we would, so those books I reading about those, I got a copy. I think mine is 5 volumes. And I was interested when I saw who wrote, there were Episcopalians who wrote chapters on the fundamentals. And today you couldn't find an Episcopalian who believes anything fundamental. And people from Church of England, Anglican writers in those, because you just go back 100 to 120 years, and there were people in most of the major, what we would call Protestant denominations, that believed the basic fundamental things. When I was a new Christian, there were, even when Dr. Howells had his pastor school early on in the late 70s and throughout the 70s, it wouldn't be uncommon to have people from Methodist churches or different Protestant denominations come because they were fundamental Presbyterians or fundamental. Now, so here was their list of 5 fundamentals. 1, the inerrancy of the Scripture. Now, no one back then was willing to put their foot down on what they meant. Most of them meant they believed the Scripture as it was written originally was inerrant, which was big because the real liberals don't believe that God wrote it at all. They believe it just the words. Maybe God gave them the idea, but it was the words of man. You couldn't trust every word. But, we put inerrancy, meaning the Bible we have, because what point is an inerrant Bible that no one has a copy of? If it's out there in, one word on a scrap of a manuscript there and one phrase on a scrap of a manuscript there, that's of no value to you and me. We need an inerrant Bible in our hands so we know how to live and please God. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word. So a Bible that's not in our hands is of no value. But anyway, number 1, inerrancy. Number 2, the virgin birth. Number 3, the substitutionary atonement, that Christ was our substitute, paid our sin. Number 4, the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Number 4, the authenticity of miracles and the second coming of Christ. Now, those are the 5 fundamentals. Well, you'll find anybody, lots of people, believe those things. What you don't read about there, how about baptism? Well, they didn't write about baptism because we got these differences on baptism. And then how about one of the Baptist the distinctives we'll be talking about, if we haven't yet, is individual soul liberty, that it's between you and God, that the church doesn't rule you. I can preach what I want from the pulpit, but my church members, people can come and go to our church whatever they believe. And I have no authority to go to a home and tell them to stop this and start that. That's not my job. That's not what the New Testament teaches. We believe in individual soul liberty, that every man shall give an account of himself to God, the Bible says. Now, I will give an account for the ministry, what I allow to be taught, who I allow to be preaching and teaching to our people, and I'll be accountable for things if I don't identify those things. But I don't go to people's homes. Now, the Protestants, they were big on it. And Wednesdays, if you haven't watched any or been able to join us at our church on Wednesdays, we've been talking about why we're Baptists and the Baptist distinctives. One of the big distinctives is it's your life. You want to sit at home in front of a video game all night long, or let your kids watch who knows what on the internet around the world, and you have no idea who they're communicating with or whatever. That's your call. It's stupid, but it's your call. We believe in liberty. And then another thing, the doctrine of the imminent return of Christ, the rapture, the fact that he's coming again, setting up a millennial kingdom and an eternal kingdom after that. There's a lot of things that are very major doctrines left out of these fundamentals. But the point being, there are in back to that word tolerance. This idea that having this man elected, and William Jennings Bryan was great. What a good guy. What a man to have in Congress and to have debating. And he debated the issues of evolution. And I mean, he was so far to the right. He'd make our modern day conservatives look like liberals. But the victory for tolerance. Tell you what happens. You tolerate a little error, and it will go to more error. And you tolerate a little more error, and it'll go to more error. Somebody's got to draw a line and say, we're not doing this. We just can't do that. And we've had referees in basketball games who, they realize these are junior varsity, junior high players, and so they let them travel a little bit. They let them double dribble some, just to keep the game rolling. Well, either call the game or don't call the game. But it's not up to the whim of the referee what rules we keep and what rules we don't keep. We don't hire the referee to be tolerant. We can get a couple of dads and we just say, look, just keep them from hurting each other. All right, that's the rule. We're going to keep them from hurting each other. They can step across the line a little bit on their free throws. One of our games, I saw the ref 2 or 3 times. I watched the guy shooting the free throw step across the free throw line when he shot his free throw. That didn't count. That's violating the rules. And one of the big differences between a Bible believer and what today's a modern Bible believing Baptist, which is not all Baptists, is that we really believe there's lines, and this is right and this is wrong. And of course, very few people believe that in the religious world. But all that to say, don't buy into this thing. We need to be tolerant. No, we don't need to be tolerant. We need to be right. We should do the right thing. Now, we can have mercy. Mercy is we acknowledge that this was wrong, but you answered that question wrong. But you know what? A lot of the kids missed it, so maybe I didn't teach it well. So we'll just call that mercy. You can all mark it right. That's mercy. But we're not saying the answer's right. We're not changing the rules here. We're just not enforcing the punishment or whatever it might be. And that's okay if you want to do that. But then it needs to be acknowledged that this is where is the line? How far out of bounds can you go? But religiously, when you start talking about the destiny of a soul for eternity, you better be forgetting all about tolerance and start making sure we do things right and please God. I want to read a little bit in Jonah. And most of you are familiar with Jonah. And there in the book of Jonah, of course, Jonah is told to go to Nineveh. He won't go. He gets on the ship, headed the opposite direction. Big storm comes. In verse 6 of chapter 1, the shipmaster came to him and said to him, "What meanest thou, sleep? Arise, call upon thy God, if so be that God will think upon us, we perish not." And they all went out and they cast lots. Who's the one who caused all this? And the lot came on Jonah, and he said, "Well, I'm a Hebrew, and I ran from God." And in verse 10, the men were exceeding afraid and said to him, "Why hast thou done this? You've messed us up here." All these men's lives were at risk because of Jonah. And this morning, I just want to take a minute and want to mention a couple of storms, but I want you to think with me, if you would, about how careful we ought to be in who we hang around. In this case, these guys' lives were at risk because of Jonah. But think about this. They weren't the only ship on the Mediterranean, but this terrible storm came. All these ships that were nearby are in this storm because of Jonah. You get around the wrong people, it's going to hurt you. But I'll tell you something else. The men later, just a verse or two later, he said, "Cast me into the sea and it'll be calm." And the men rowed hard. Then verse 13, they didn't want to throw him in. Finally, they cried out in verse 14. They cried to the Lord and said, "We beseech thee, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not upon us innocent blood. For thou, O Lord, hast done as it pleased thee." And they took Jonah up and cast him in the water. They were fearful. They didn't want God mad at him for throwing him overboard. But they had to say, threw him overboard. Well, now these guys, because they did right, the storm was calm. And everybody, people didn't even know about that ship. People didn't know about Jonah, didn't know who he was. All those ships were now in a calm because the men in that ship did the right thing. And so we have a storm because of one wrong guy, and then we have calm because of some right guys. And I just want to encourage you today to think about who it is we're around. Proverbs says when the wicked are in authority, the people mourn. You put bad people in Sacramento and Washington, it grieves the nation. It hurts the nation. And you put an evil man in leadership like a Hitler or whoever, the whole nation is hurting. And so we want righteous authorities. You just think about the other stories. Remember the Apostle Paul in the end of the book of Acts. He's in this terrible storm, and everybody on the ship was saved. I think it was 176 people, if I remember right. They were all saved because they had the right guy in the boat with them. Think about the disciples. They're on the Sea of Galilee, and the storm, the boat is being tossed. And that's a pretty serious thing. Jesus is asleep. They said, Master, we perish. And he said, where's your faith? And he got up and the waters calmed, the wind stopped. Well, there were probably other people who ridiculously, as ridiculous as it may sound, they were out on that sea, maybe got caught in the storm. I've been there and had them say the storms come off the Golan Heights, whipped down the hill through where the maniac of Gadara was. And they said it's so easy to be caught out there in the Sea of Galilee in a terrible storm because those winds come off the desert. So if there were other ships, as soon as Jesus said, peace be still, all the ships had peace. People that didn't even know Jesus was out on the water, they had peace. And it makes such a difference who you hang around. And I want to encourage you, be very guarded who you go with. You may go into a storm, but make sure you go into the storm with the right people. And Proverbs 13:20 says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, a companion of fools will be destroyed. And oh, how careful we need to be with the right people when trials come. You think about Jonathan and his armor bearer. Here's King Saul. He's backslidden by now, lost the blessing of God. Most of the army's hanging around with him, sitting under a tree, pouting. Everything's going wrong. And they're not doing anything. Philistine armies are all around, and they're trying to destroy the people of Israel. Jonathan and his armor bearer, they go out, and Jonathan says to his armor bearer, let's climb up here and let's just see what we can do. Well, his armor bearer was at risk if you trust your eyes. Visually, the safe spots with the crowd, with the king, with the people, all these soldiers. But you know what? He was with the right person. And that armor bearer goes up, follows Jonathan, good leadership thing. Leader goes first. And they go up there, kill all these Philistines. And then there's a trembling in the camp, in the host of the Philistines. And when Jonathan took that step of faith, the armor bearer followed him. They get up on the hill and they kill these. God just sent like dominoes through the troops of the Philistines. And it all happened because of Jonathan, the man of faith. Now you think about who you following. You trying to stay with the crowd, or you following a man of faith? Are you hanging around somebody who's doing nothing but pouting and grumbling, but you're in the crowd, or you're with somebody, maybe they're a little daring. Maybe they're out soul winning and running a bus or teaching Sunday school or preaching on the street or whatever it might be. Be with the right people, because when the battle comes, the right people are going to come out on top. The right people are going to win if we keep our company right. And even to the cross, it looked like the disciples were wrong. They're hiding in the upper room. Judas has killed himself. Jesus is crucified and buried, and it all looked like they'd failed. Oh, no. You stay with the right people, and you're going to end up on top. And whatever the difficulty it might, God lets trials come. And there may be some storm. I'll tell you, we've had a battle or two, and we've, in almost 48 years of Christianity and 40 years pastoring, there's been some difficulties. And but you know what? I want to be in the right crowd. if I'm going to face a trial, I want to face the right people. I want to challenge you. Don't get bad advice. Don't get advice from the godless. Don't let some godless person or some backslidden Christian, somebody who's vindictive, somebody who's bitter, somebody who's out in the world, don't get them to draw you away. Interesting little quote. I was listening to a sermon by E.V. Hill, and he pastored a great church in Los Angeles. And I may play a little of this in church, but he's talking about Adam and Eve in the garden, and he said, now he's there, and the serpent comes along and says, yea, if God said. And he begins to question God. And Dr. Hill, he says, now, first problem is Eve shouldn't have been near that tree. That's the first problem. Second problem is when the devil approached her, she should have said, pardon me, but you're going to need to go talk to my husband about that because that's his decision. And you just go talk to him. He said if she'd have kept in her right relationship to authority and the right relationship there, instead of hanging out negotiating with the devil, she'd have never done what she did. But you know what? She got in a relationship with the wrong person instead of staying close to the right person, and all of mankind got in a mess. And it's so who we hang out with matters so much. And again, we're not talking about never having trouble. We're going to have trouble. But let's have trouble with the right people. So when the trouble comes, we're under the blessing of God, and God carries us through the trouble. And then tribulation works patience, Romans 5 says, and patience experience, and experience hope, and hope maketh not ashamed. And so now that trial makes me a better Christian, where if I'm with the wrong people in the trial's going to break me and destroy me or my marriage or my family. Oh, if you're going to be in a storm, the mariners, they were with Jonah. That's what caused the storm. When they did the right thing and tossed Jonah out, there was calm all over because they did the right thing. And let's hang with the right people, doing the right thing. And if you think you might be in the wrong crowd, at the wrong church, listening to the wrong, that's why I need to get off social media. Most people do. They listen to way too much wrong stuff. But you might just need to tell God, you know what, God, I've been hanging with the wrong crowd, and I'm done. Help me to get the right crowd. And there may be a time of transition because you leave the wrong crowd. The right crowd may not trust you. So you may need to walk over and do the right thing for a while by yourself. And then the right crowd will accept you before long. But if we're going to be in a storm, let's face that storm with the right crowd. Have a great day.